I'm recording my homily for the first Sunday of Lent, and actually I'm running so late. We've already had the second Sunday of Lent, but I'm going to record it anyways. This will be my Lenten penance for being so late. I don't really remember my homily other than the core message that I had in it, and this is where, so the gospel for this Sunday is Jesus going out into the desert, right? Now, it's tempting to think that Jesus is going out in some way to fall victim to Satan. Jesus is in the desert doing a retreat, and Satan comes and kind of pounces on him, right? I don't think that's really what's going on. I think Jesus, if anything, he's baiting Satan. He goes out into the desert. Now, remember the Garden of Eden, right? So you have this beautiful home, this beautiful garden. Everything's at peace. Everything is beautiful. Everything has dignity. There's life and there's love, right? But God allows Satan into his home. Now, that's probably a whole nother homily to try to figure out or to talk about that. But God allows Satan into this beautiful, beautiful oasis of life and love. And Satan then destroys it. He begins to rob it of life and love because he tempts Adam and Eve in the garden to turn away from God. Okay, so you remember that very first temptation. Well, now you have Jesus doing the exact opposite. He's going into Satan's home, the desert, where there's death and isolation, the opposite of life and love, right? There's death and isolation. It's harsh, it's foreboding, it's dangerous. And Jesus intentionally goes out into the desert, into Satan's home, to seemingly be tempted, but also, this is where I think, is basically to confront Satan and reveal his lies. Okay, so let's look at the three temptations. I did this last year. I'm going to do it again, but I think I'm going to go a little bit deeper with it. So the three temptations of Jesus when he goes into the desert are as follows, right? So the first temptation, Jesus is fasting, and he's been fasting for 40 days. Well, if you go back in your memory of all the imagery of 40 days, right? 40 days in the desert. But he's been fasting for 40 days, so obviously he's very hungry. But he's doing a work of self-mortification. He's doing a work of discipline. He's conforming his heart to his mission. There's a sacrifice being made. So Satan comes along and says, Jesus, you don't need to be doing that, right? Now I can make this temptation look really dark. Satan comes to him and says, Jesus, are you doing it for your people? Is that why you're fasting? Is that why you're making a sacrifice for your people? Do you really think that they care about you? Do you really think they want to follow you? I mean, look in the Garden of Eden, how fast I picked off Adam and Eve in your home, in this perfect world that you created as God, and I go in and I tempt them like that. Do you really think people that go to church, do you really think all these Catholics, you really think I can't tempt them away from you? It's ugly, right? It's ugly to hear it. It's ugly just to even think about it. But that's Satan. He's so consumed with himself. What is he intrinsically tempting him to? Give up. Give up. Your people aren't worth it. Give up. Do you ever hear that in your own life? Just give up. Don't even try. Just give up, right? Think of a marriage that's struggling, right? Satan comes in and says, just give up, man. You made a mistake. You made a mistake to begin with. Just give up on the marriage. You got a kid who's struggling. You got a kid who's rebelling. Just give up. Why fight? Why bother? Why put the energy, right? They're not worth it. Ugh, it's ugly. It's really ugly. Let's go into the second temptation. So the first temptation was just to give up, right? Satan uses that on us. Just give up. Second temptation. He takes him up to the temple, parapet of the temple, the tower, right? See right behind me, our tower, right? We just put our bell back up in our tower anyways. I don't know if I've ever recorded my homily in front of St. Anne's like this before. Usually I'm facing that way, and that's the water, right? This time I'm facing the church. So he takes him up to the bell tower. He takes him up on top of the church. Now, why does Satan do that? It's a power play. It's a power move. It's like, hey, I'm the alpha dog here. You think your temple and your place of worship is so important. I'm up on top of it, right? And so he takes him up on top of it and he says, throw yourself down. If you have so much faith in God, if you trust God so much, then throw yourself down. Let's see how strong your faith is. What's that temptation? Do you really trust God? Do you really trust Him? Right? You have some challenges in your life. Do you really trust Him? Or are you going to be lured away and find a solution to your problems that's either immoral, amoral, or just has nothing to do with God, right? Or do you really have faith when it counts? And so Satan, again, I can make this one really dark. He says, you know what? You don't really believe God's going to catch you, do you? You really don't trust Him, do you? Does your life really have any value? I mean, just commit suicide. Throw yourself down. Just kill yourself, right? Man, this is a horrible temptation to the culture for our youth, because they often don't know their intrinsic value and dignity. And so that temptation to kill themselves, which is coupled with the temptation to not trust God. It's really dark. All right, I'm going to be going back over these in a second and make them a little more positive, but anyways. The third temptation, Satan takes Jesus up to this mountain and he shows him the splendor and the grandeur of all these kingdoms, which he then lies and takes credit for, right? I suppose the only thing he can take credit for is if there's sin and darkness in those areas, disaster, okay? But he lies and he takes credit for it all. He says, I'll give it all to you, liar. But he says, I'll give it all to you if you just worship me. I'll give you wealth. I'll give you power. I'll give you pleasure. I'll give you honor if you just worship me. You know what he's promising him here? If you just worship me, I will isolate you. I'll give you everything that you think you want, everything you think you need, but in reality, I'm going to isolate you. I'm going to pull you away, because none of those promises offer life or love. You remember Jesus on the cross, right? I've used this example before. Jesus up on the cross, he has no wealth, he's poor, he has no power, he has no pleasure, and there's no honor. And so you think of your prayers, right? So I want to go back through these temptations and I want to find something positive and challenging in them. If you think of the prayers that you offer to God, if you ask Him for wealth, now I'm not necessarily saying if you're asking Him for help, right? If you're really struggling. But if you ask Him for wealth, if you ask Him for power, if you ask Him for pleasure, if you ask Him for honor, He's gonna look at you and He's gonna say, I don't have those. You will see the image of Him on the cross and He will say, I do not have those. But if you ask me for life or for love, that I can give. And so when we attack that third temptation, when we're tempted to seek one of these other things that would isolate us, Jesus says, pray for life, pray for love, because that is what will fill your heart, those two things, right? Now let's go back to the second temptation. Throw yourself down. Pope Francis has talked a little bit with the whole Amazon Synod, and he's talking about the environment. He's talking about how we throw things away constantly. We constantly generate things that are thrown away. We generate trash, right? And so he talks about our planet and our responsibility to the environment. And he has a point in all of that. But if you listen carefully, he will also often connect that with how we view each other. We are a throwaway generation. We throw away the unborn. We throw away people. We throw away our elderly. We file them away in a nursing home or something like that, right? And so we are a throwaway people. And so he challenges us then to remember that every one of us has this intrinsic beauty and dignity. We belong to God, not to Satan. And that's every single one of us. That's why the week before he was talking about love of enemies. It's this massive challenge that we must see within every single person, that beauty and dignity, and first see that, and then we can conquer this second temptation. When Satan tempts us to throw ourselves away, to throw others away, or just to be useless and wasteful. Right? So there lies the answer, if you will, to the second temptation. We go back into the Garden of Eden and we say, God, I trust you. I trust in you, Lord. I trust in you. Okay? Especially when we're struggling with perhaps someone who's testing that for us. All right. Then we go back into the first temptation. Just give up. And the answer to that is always perseverance. St. Ignatius of Loyola says in his spiritual exercises for the Jesuits and that we can use in our lives, he says, don't give up. When you're going through a rough patch, what you don't do is you don't give up. You don't change your daily prayers. You don't stop praying. When you feel like stop praying, that's exactly what you do is you pray. And so we persevere. Now, one thought to keep in mind also in there is that we make sure that we're persevering in the right way. We make sure that what we're doing is actually God's will. And so we surrender that over to God and say, God, is what I'm doing your will? Is this what you want me to do? As opposed to maybe what I want to do. And so if the answer is yes, then we must persevere, no matter what we feel, no matter what we're thinking, no matter what we're desiring. If it's God's will, we persevere. So these are all great things for Lent, okay? And I apologize for doing this one so late. All right, God bless. I'm going to stop this one, and then I'm going to record my second Sunday of Lent homily, okay? Take care.